In 31 years of keeping the livery in Cordray, I have written down almost everything. Births, deaths, the price of oats, the day the church bell cracked and nobody could afford to recast it. I am the kind of man who trusts ink more than memory, because memory bends and ink does not. So when people ask me about Eli Dunmore, and they always ask eventually, leaning in like they're about to be told a ghost story, I don't tell it the way the town tells it. The town will tell you he was cursed, that his ranch sat on bad ground, that the women who agreed to marry him had a way of vanishing, dying, or running before the vows were dry. 3 of them. 3. You count a 3 around a man like that and people stop calling it grief. They start calling it a pattern. What the town won't tell you, what I've got written down in a ledger nobody else has read, is what happened the autumn a woman named Della Voss stepped off the coach, heard every warning Cordray had to offer, and did the one thing nobody before her had the spine to do. She stayed. This is not a story about a curse. I want you to understand that going in, because it took me too long to understand it myself. This is a story about what it costs a man to be misunderstood for years, and what it costs a woman to look at a wounded thing and decide it isn't dangerous, only hurt. It's about a third man too, an Apache rider the town called Marcos and never once asked his true name, who knew more about that cursed ground than every gossip in Cordray combined. Stay with me. I'm an old man and I tell things slow, but I promise you by the end you'll understand why I never could throw this particular ledger away. It started with the smell of smoke that shouldn't have been there. I was forking down hay in the loft late September, the kind of afternoon where the light comes in gold and slantways and dust hangs in it like something holy. And I caught wood smoke on the wind, not chimney smoke, not the clean burn of a cook stove, but the greasy, panicked smell of a fire that has gotten loose from its purpose. I came down the ladder faster than a man my age has any business doing. Out in the street, half of Cordray was already looking east, toward the Dunmore spread, where a column of gray was climbing into that gold light and smearing it. "That's Dunmore's," said the Prout boy, breathless, like he was the first to think of it. "That's his barn." It was his barn. By the time I'd hitched the wagon and a few of us rode out, the barn was gone past saving, a black ribcage of timbers with the fire chewing the last of it. Eli Dunmore stood in the middle of his own yard with a bucket in each hand and no water in either, watching it burn. He wasn't fighting it anymore. He'd given that up. He just stood there, ash settling on his shoulders like the first snow, and his face had the particular stillness of a man who has decided the world simply intends to take things from him, and there is no arguing with it. Now I want to tell you what Eli Dunmore looked like, because the town had built him into something he wasn't, and you ought to see the real article. He was tall, but he stooped, the way a man stoops when he's spent years making himself smaller so people will stop looking. Big hands, scarred and capable. A face that would have been handsome if it ever finished a thought before doubt crawled across it. He was maybe 35 that autumn and he carried himself like 60. "Eli," I said, climbing down. "Anybody hurt the stock?" "Got the horses out." His voice was sandpaper. "Lost the mule, couldn't get her to move. He stopped, swallowed. "She just stood there, Gus. Wouldn't come even when I had the rope on her, like she'd rather burn than trust me." I didn't have anything to say to that, so I did the cowardly thing and busied my hands. We threw what water we had on the grass at the edges so it wouldn't take the dry brush and run for the house. The Prout boy and the Larkin brothers worked alongside, and I noticed things, it's my affliction, that not a one of them spoke directly to Eli. They worked his fire like you'd work a stranger's, with a kind of held breath, like the bad luck might be catching. That's the part the town never owns up to. They didn't shun Eli with cruelty. They shunned him with care for themselves. There's a meaner kind of cruelty in that if you ask me, but nobody ever does. When the fire was down to coals and the danger passed, the men drifted off with mumbled condolences that didn't land anywhere near Eli's ears. And that's when I saw the rider sitting his horse up on the rise to the north, where the Dunmore land butts against the broken country. I knew him. Everyone in Cordray knew him by sight, and almost nobody knew him at all. They called him Marcos. He was Apache, Chiricahua, I'd later learn, though the town never bothered to wonder which people he belonged to, the way they'd never bothered to learn the difference between a Texas Longhorn and a milk cow if both were brown. He'd come through every few weeks with horses to trade, and he traded fair, and that fairness made certain men in town uneasy in a way they covered with jokes. He sat up there on a paint horse and he watched the smoke, and his face, I was too far to read it clear, but his stillness was a different kind than Eli's. Eli's stillness was defeat. The rider's was attention. He was reading something in that fire that the rest of us couldn't see. Then he turned the paint and rode off into the broken country, and I made a note to myself, the way I do, to find out why an Apache horse trader would care 2 cents about a white rancher's burning barn. The coach came in 3 days later, and Della Voss came in on it. I remember it because I keep the coach times, and that one was late, and I was standing out front of the livery with my watch open being annoyed about it when the door swung and out she stepped. She was not what the territory sends, usually. The territory sends 2 kinds of women on the eastern coach, the hopeful young ones with too much luggage and too little sense of what's coming, and the hard, worn ones with a flat look that says the worst has already happened, so why hurry? Della Voss was neither. She was maybe 30, with the upright carriage of a woman who'd done physical work and wasn't ashamed of it, and a face that was plain until she was interested in something, and then it lit from inside like a lamp behind a window. She was interested in a great deal. I watched her take the measure of the whole street in about 4 seconds, and I watched her decide it would do. "You'd be the man with the wagons," she said to me, not a question. "I'd be Gus Hale, ma'am, livery hauling, and," I tapped my temple, "such town history as nobody else'll keep." "Then you're the man I want." She had one trunk which she'd carried herself before I could get to it. "I'm to take up at the Dunmore place. I'm given to understand it's a piece out of town." I'll be honest with you. My stomach dropped, because I knew the way the whole town would know by suppertime exactly what she was. She was the 4th. I want to be careful here about how I tell this because it would be easy to make it sound like she didn't know what she was walking into. She knew. That's the thing the town never credited her with. She'd answered an advertisement and the man who placed it had written to her honest, more honest, it turned out, than he'd been with anyone, and she had come anyway. With her eyes open, with her trunk packed, knowing his history and choosing to find out if history was the same thing as fate. "Ma'am," I said, and I picked my words, "you'll hear things in town about the Dunmore place, about Mr. Dunmore." "I expect I will." She climbed up onto the wagon seat without being asked or assisted. "Folks do love to be the one to tell you. You can spare yourself, Mr. Hale. Whatever it is, I've likely heard a worse version." So I drove her out, and I didn't tell her about the barn because I figured she'd see the bones of it soon enough. She saw it. She didn't flinch. She looked at the black ruin of it for a long moment, and then she said, almost to herself, "Recent." 3 days, I said. And then, quieter, "Bad time to be burned out just before winter. He'll be needing every hand of help and getting none of it." She said it like a fact she was filing away, not like pity. There's a difference, and I marked it. Eli came out onto the porch when the wagon rolled in, and I have never in my life seen a man more visibly want to disappear into his own doorframe. He'd cleaned up. He'd put on the shirt that didn't have the elbow gone. He'd combed his hair with water, and you could see the comb tracks in it, and that small grooming, that pathetic, hopeful comb track, near broke my heart. "Mrs. Voss," he said. "Miss," she corrected. I was widowed. But I never cared for being called by his name once he was gone. "Della suits." She came down off the wagon. "You'd be Eli." I would. His hands were doing that thing again, that ringing. The barn. You'll have seen the barn. I want to say plainly, before you've unpacked so much as a stocking, that this isn't a prosperous concern you've come to. I wrote you the truth in my letters, but the barn's news since then. If you've a mind to turn the wagon around, Gus'll take you back to the coach and I won't think the worse of you. I'd think you sensible." She looked at him a long while. "That's a fine speech," she said, "for a man trying to get rid of a woman before she's so much as had a cup of coffee. You make it to all of them." And Eli Dunmore, I swear this is true, I wrote it down that night, Eli Dunmore made a sound that I realized after a second was a laugh. A rusty one, like a gate that hadn't swung in years. Like his body had half forgotten the machinery of it. "No," he said. "No, I don't believe I ever did." "Then there's coffee, I hope," said Della, and she walked past him into the house carrying her own trunk, and I drove the empty wagon back to town thinking that whatever I'd expected to write in my ledger that day, it was going to need a longer entry than I'd planned. The town's version of Eli Dunmore went like this, and you'd hear it inside a week of arriving in Cordray, generally over the second drink. His first wife was Ruth. She came with him from Tennessee and she died their second winter on the place, childbed fever, the baby with her. That's not a curse. That's the territory. That's half the graves on the hill. But it was a beginning and people like a story with a beginning. The second was a girl named Sari, betrothed by letter, who came on the coach the way Della had. The story goes she took one look at the Dunmore place, at the loneliness of it and the man's silence, and she got back on the same coach without spending a night. Now, and here's where I have to interrupt the town's telling, I happen to know that's only half true. Sari did leave, but she didn't leave because Eli was strange or the land was bad. She left because 3 days after she arrived, before anyone knew she'd ever come back, she got word her own mother was dying back in Missouri and she had a duty there. She wrote Eli a kind letter. I know because Eli showed it to me once, years later, drunk and grieving, smoothing it out on the bar like the most precious thing he owned. The town never read that letter. The town just saw a woman flee a man and built the rest from the cheapest materials available. The third was Amelia, and Amelia is the one that turned a sad luck rancher into a cursed one, because Amelia drowned. She'd been on the place near 4 months. Eli was halfway to actually marrying her, bands read, a date set, and in the spring melt with the river up and ugly, Amelia went down to the crossing for reasons nobody ever established, and the river took her. They found her 2 miles down, 3 days later. 3 women, one dead of fever, one fled for love of her mother, one drowned in a spring flood. Not a curse among them, just the ordinary horror of living out where the land doesn't care if you survive it. But you string 3 together and hang them on one quiet man who's bad at defending himself, and the town gets its ghost story, and Eli Dunmore gets a life sentence of being avoided in the street. I knew all this. I'd known it for years, and I drove home from delivering Della Voss to that house with a knot in my gut because I'd watched 3 women come and the place break itself on them, and I had no faith, none, that the 4th would end any different. I'm ashamed of that now. I'd let the town's story get into me too, just a little, like smoke gets into wool. You don't smell it until somebody clean walks into the room. The worst thing came at the end of October, and it came with cattle. You have to understand how thin the Dunmore place was running. The barn fire hadn't just cost Eli a building and a stubborn mule. It had cost him his winter feed. Everything he'd put up against the cold had been in that barn, and it went up with it. A man can replace a barn over time. A man cannot replace, in late October with the grass dying, 3 months of stored hay. His cattle were going to start dying in the first hard freeze, and everyone knew it, and the knowing sat on that ranch like a held breath. I rode out partly to bring a sack of coffee Della had asked for, and partly, I'll confess, to see how the experiment was going. I expected to find the place already curdling. What I found was Della Voss up to her elbows in a thing I'd never have predicted. She was doctoring a heifer that had gone down with bloat, and she was doing it competently, and she was swearing, not the genteel swearing of a town woman caught out, but the fluent, structural cursing of someone who'd worked stock her whole life and knew exactly which words a stubborn animal required. "You came from a ranch," I said, getting down. Came from a ranch, married off a ranch, got widowed back onto my brother's ranch where I was about as welcome as a third boot. She didn't look up. Eli's letter said he needed a partner more than he needed a wife. I figured a man honest enough to write that was a man worth the gamble. She got the heifer up, stood back, breathing hard, wiping her hands on a rag that had given up being any particular color. He's a strange one, Gus. I won't pretend he isn't. But he's strange the way a dog is strange when it's been kicked enough flinches before you've raised your hand. Folks did that to him, the kicking, not some curse. You worked that out fast. I've been kicked. She said it plain, no drama in it, and looked off toward the broken country to the north. First week I couldn't figure why he kept apologizing for things that weren't his to apologize for. The weather, the coffee being thin, the way the wind sounds out here at night. He apologized for the wind, Gus, like he'd personally arranged it to keep me awake. Took me a few days to see it. He spent so long being blamed for everything that happens within a mile of him that he started blaming himself before anyone else can get to it. Saves them the trouble. She let that sit. Then, I'll break him of it, but the cattle first. The cattle won't wait on a man's wounded soul. Now here's where the writer comes back into it. The cattle problem had no answer that I could see, and I'm a practical man. I'd run the numbers. I knew that without feed Eli would lose better than half his herd over winter, and likely the ranch with it. But the morning after I brought the coffee, before the sun was full up, the Apache rider they called Marcos came down off the rise leading not just his paint but a string of pack mules. And those mules were loaded with hay. I wasn't there for it. Della told me after, and I wrote it down close to her words because they mattered. Eli had come out with a rifle, not raised, held. A man's old habit when the unexplained comes down off the hill. And the rider had stopped at a careful distance and said, in plain enough English, "Your barn burned because the wind comes off that rise wrong in the dry season. It always has. My grandfather grazed here before there was a barn to burn. I told the man who built that barn where not to build it. He did not listen. I am not surprised it burned." A pause. "I have hay." "You have no hay. The price is fair. I am not a ghost and I am not your bad luck. I am a man with hay and a winter coming the same as yours." Eli, Della said, lowered the rifle slow. And then, and this is the part she told me with something soft in her own hard face, Eli said, "Why? Folks in town wouldn't sell me a bucket of water if I was on fire. Why would you ride hay to a stranger?" And the rider looked at him a while and said, "Because I have also been the man everyone decided was the reason for their troubles. It is a long way to ride alone. I thought perhaps you knew the road." His name was not Marcos. He told them his name that morning, and Della told it to me, and I am not going to write it cheap on this page the way the town wrote everything cheap. I'll only say that for the rest of that winter, Eli Dunmore called him by it, careful and correct, and it was the first time in living memory I'd heard a man in Cordray country call that rider anything but the lazy white name they'd hung on him. I marked that as the realest thing that had happened on the Dunmore place in years. So they had hay, bought fair on terms, the rider taking part payment in spring foals he'd helped break, and the three of them, Eli, Della, and the man the town called Marcos, set in to keep a herd alive through a winter that meant to kill it. I'd like to tell you it was a season of healing, and in some ways it was, but I told you at the start I tell things straight. And the truth is that the winter near broke all three of them, and broke open the thing in Eli that had to break before he could be any use to a woman who decided to stay. It happened at the river. Midwinter, a calf got out onto the ice at the crossing, the same crossing, you understand, where Amelia had drowned. The very same. And the ice gave under the calf, and the calf went in, bawling, and Eli came down to the bank and froze. Not from cold, from memory. Della told me he stood on that bank and could not make his legs work, that his face went the color of the snow, that he started to shake and could not stop, and he was saying a name over and over, and the name was not the calf's and was not Della's. It was Amelia's. And here is the morally heavy thing, the choice that I think about still. Della had a decision to make in that half a minute. She could go to Eli, comfort the man, hold the breaking thing, tend the wound she'd promised herself she'd heal. Or she could go to the calf, which was drowning, which would be dead in a minute, and which was, practically, coldly, worth more to the survival of that ranch than one man's old grief. She went to the calf. She broke the ice with the butt of an axe and went into her waist in water that could stop a heart, and she got a rope on the calf, and she hauled it up while Eli stood frozen on the bank watching another living thing nearly die in that same cursed water. And when the calf was up and she was out, blue and shaking worse than Eli was, she did not go and gentle him. She walked up to him, soaked through and furious with cold, and she said, "Eli told me this part himself years on," and his voice shook telling it. She said, "She drowned, Eli. Amelia drowned. It was the river that did it, not you. And you have been standing on this bank for 2 years letting it drown you too. I am not going to drown. Do you hear me? I am cold and I am alive and I am not going to drown, and if you want to keep standing on the bank where you lost her, you do that. But I am going up to the house to get warm, and the door will be open, and you can come be alive with me, or you can stay here being dead with her. Those are the 2 doors, Eli. Pick one." And she turned and walked up to the house, dripping and shaking, and she did not look back to see which he chose. That's the choice I mean. Everyone thinks the brave choice that day was going into the river. It wasn't. The brave choice was walking up the bank without looking back, giving the wounded man the dignity of choosing for himself, when every soft instinct she had was screaming to turn around and choose for him. She trusted him to follow. She gambled the whole thing on it. She could have been wrong. She told me later it was the longest walk of her life, that 100 yards of snow with her back to him, not knowing if she'd hear his boots behind her or not. She heard his boots. He came in shaking, and they got out of the wet clothes and into blankets by the stove. And the rider, who'd been up at the lambing shed and missed all of it, came in later and found the 2 of them sitting close in front of the fire not talking, and being a wise man, he made the coffee himself and didn't ask. But something had cracked in Eli that day, and over the back half of that winter it kept cracking, the way ice cracks before it lets the river run. He started talking about Ruth and the baby, about Sary's letter that the town never read, about Amelia and the way he'd stopped being able to walk past that crossing. He talked the way a man talks when he's been alone inside his own head for years, and has just discovered the door was never locked. Too fast, then all at once, then in long silences that Della learned to sit through without filling. I'd come out with supplies and I'd see it happening, this slow thaw, and I'd ride home and write that Eli Dunmore was, against all the odds the town had laid against him, becoming a man again. But the town was the thing that hadn't thawed. And the town was about to do the cruelest thing it had ever done to Eli Dunmore, worse than the shunning, worse than the avoided eyes, because spring was coming, and with spring came the talk, and the talk had found a new and terrible shape. The talk had decided that Della Voss was going to die. Not as a wish, as a certainty, as entertainment. They'd lay odds in the saloon, I heard them, and I'm ashamed I didn't break more than one nose over it, odds on how the 4th one would go. Fever like Ruth, the river like Amelia. Or would she be the smart one and run like Sary was supposed to have? They'd made a game of waiting for a living woman to be taken by a curse that did not exist, and they did it loud enough that it was only a matter of time before it got back to the ranch. It got back to the ranch in April, and how it got there and what Della did about it is the last of what I have to tell you. It got to the ranch through the Prout boy, who didn't mean harm, and that's the worst kind of harm there is. He'd ridden out with a message about the spring cattle drive, and he was young and full of the importance of knowing things, and somewhere in his babbling he let slip the saloon's game, the odds, the waiting, the way the whole town had its money down on how Della Voss would die before the year was out. He realized what he'd said about a sentence too late, went white, stammered. Della just looked at him, calm as still water, until he found a reason to be somewhere else very quickly. Eli had heard it too, And I want you to understand what that did to him, because it's the heart of the whole thing. For 2 years Eli had believed, in the buried down part of a man that no amount of daylight reasoning can reach, that the town might be right. That maybe he was bad ground. That maybe the women who came to him were marked the moment they took his name. He'd never have said it aloud. Della had near argued him out of it through the long winter, but it lived in him still, a splinter too deep to dig out. And now the town had said it out loud, made sport of it, and the splinter was working its way back to the surface. Della found him that evening in the bones of the burned barn, which he'd never cleared, standing among the black timbers like a man visiting a grave. She told me what passed between them, and I've never forgotten it. "I'll go," he said before she'd said a word. "Della, I'll sign the place to you and I'll go. You'll be safe once I'm gone. They can't, whatever it is, it follows me, not the land. You take the ranch and the writer'll help you work it and you'll live. You'll live. I can't watch it happen a fourth time. I can't. I'd rather walk into that broken country and not come out than stand on a bank again and watch the water take someone because she was fool enough to love me." It was, Della said, the most words he'd ever said at once. And every one of them was him offering to die so that she might be spared a death that existed only in a saloon's cruel arithmetic. Here was her moral weight to carry, the second great choice. She could comfort him again. She could argue, reason, out-talk the splinter the way she'd been doing all winter, or she could do the harder, colder, truer thing. She chose the truer thing. "No," she said, "I won't take it from you." "Della, listen to me, Eli Dunmore, and then I'll never say it again, because a thing said once and meant is worth more than a thing repeated soft." She stepped over the black timbers to stand in front of him, in the ruin of the barn in the last of the April light. "You are not bad ground. You are not a curse. You are a man 3 terrible ordinary things happened to, the same as they happened to half the families on that hill of graves, and the only difference between you and them is that they had the luck to be liked, and you had the bad fortune to be quiet in a town that mistakes quiet for guilt. And you want to walk into the broken country and die so I can be safe. You think that's love. It's not. It's the curse finishing its work with your own hands. You'd be the 4th one they killed, not the river, not the fever, them, with their odds and their stories. And you'd be doing it for them. You'd be saving them the trouble, same as you've saved them the trouble of blaming you for 2 years by blaming yourself first. I will not let you. Not because I need saving. Because you do. And I did not cross half this country and break the ice on that river and sit through a winter of your silences to watch you walk off into the dark and prove the town right. So here is what we are going to do. We are going to ride into Cordray on Sunday, together, in the daylight. And we are going to be alive in front of every one of them. That is the only thing that kills a curse, Eli. Not running, not dying. Just standing in the street being stubbornly, ordinarily alive until the story they told runs out of road. And Eli wept. A grown man in the ruins of his barn wept the way the ground weeps when the thaw finally comes, not gentle, but breaking. And Della held him and did not say another word, because she'd said her once and meant it. They rode into Cordray that Sunday. I was there. I'd made sure to be there because I'd gotten word it was coming, and I'll be damned if I was going to miss the one good thing. You have to picture it. The whole town strung along the street the way towns are on a Sunday, in their second-best clothes, full of their own importance. And down the road comes Eli Dunmore, who hadn't been seen in town in months, sitting his horse straight for once, not stooped. And beside him, on a gray mare, Della Voss, alive, unmistakably alive, with that face that lit from inside, lit now like she'd swallowed the whole spring. And behind them, a respectful few lengths back but unmistakably with them, the Apache rider the town called Marcos, and Eli, now called by his right name. The street went quiet the way a saloon goes quiet when the wrong man walks in. All those people who'd laid odds on this woman's death, watching her ride past them breathing. Della didn't gloat. That's what I want you to understand about her, the thing that made her more than just brave. She didn't ride in there to shame them. She rode in there and she got down at the general store and she bought flour and coffee and a bolt of yellow cloth, and she was pleasant. She asked after Mrs. Larkin's bad hip. She admired the Prout boy's new boots and watched him near die of relief that she'd forgiven him. She was so ordinary, so calmly, stubbornly, unmistakably alive and ordinary, that the curse had nowhere to stand. You cannot tell a ghost story about a woman who is haggling over the price of flour right in front of you. By the time they rode out again, something in Cordray had shifted. Not all at once, towns don't turn on a Sunday, but the odds came off the board at the saloon that week. Nobody had the stomach for the game anymore. It's one thing to bet on a stranger's death. It's another to bet on the death of a woman who asked after your wife's hip and meant it. I'll close the way the true ones close, which is to say not all the way. Eli and Della married that June. Quiet at the ranch, with me and the rider and a circuit preacher who didn't know enough of the town's stories to be afraid. The rebuilt barn went up where the rider told them to put it, out of the wind that came wrong off the rise, and as far as I know it's still standing. They had hard years after. Of course they did, everyone out here does. A drought that nearly finished them, a winter that took stock, the ordinary griefs and the ordinary mercies. Della lost a baby one spring and I thought it might undo all the slow healing, might wake the old splinter in Eli's see, it follows me. But it didn't. Because by then he'd learned the thing she'd taught him on the riverbank. That the choice is always between standing on the bank with the dead and walking up to the house with the living, and you have to keep choosing it, over and over, your whole life, every morning. He chose it, he kept choosing it. The rider stayed in their lives too, in the loose way of a man who has his own roads to ride but knows where there's coffee and welcome. He and Eli understood each other in the way only two men who have both been somebody's curse can understand each other. I never did fully learn his story. I've come to think I wasn't owed it. Some men keep their ledgers in their own keeping, and that's their right. As for me, I'm an old man and the livery's gone to my nephew, and I sit, and I write these things down so they don't bend in the keeping. People still ask me sometimes, the young ones, about the cursed rancher who lost 3 brides. They want the ghost story. They lean in. And I tell them there wasn't any curse. That there was just a quiet man the world had decided to misunderstand, and a woman who looked at all the warnings the world handed her, and did the bravest, plainest, most stubborn thing a person can do. She refused to walk away. And I tell them the last thing I have to tell, which is the thing I think about most, and then I close the ledger and I don't explain it, because some things you've got to carry the rest of the way yourself. The last time I rode out to the Dunmore place, Eli was an old man and Della older still, and they were sitting on the porch in the evening light, not talking, the way people get when they've said everything and don't need to anymore. And I asked Eli, I don't know why after all those years, I asked him what he thought it was in the end that broke the curse.